We couldn't have got this far without ARAG's support, knowing that they're in the background and that they're prepared to help.
Good afternoon, Steve and Ruth. I'd really like to focus on some of the cases that you're dealing with at the moment. Ruth, St Helena, where did you come across those cases?
One of our partners in the legal network received a tip-off about some rather odd goings-on in St Helena that were to do with a surgeon, so it involved clinical negligence, but they didn't have anybody in their firm who could deal with it. We had an initial meeting and then we did some research for ourselves and discovered that this orthopaedic surgeon was being investigated for 5 counts of unlawful wounding. And we also understood that from a population of 4,000, in his time on the island, he had operated on approximately 600 of that 4,000, and that therefore potentially there were going to be potentially hundreds of clinical negligence claims against him and therefore against the government.
I understand it was quite challenging communicating with St Helena.
You can say that again. It was very tricky because it takes us 48 hours to get there door to door. And when we first started going, the internet coverage was really patchy. Plus, most people on the island at that time didn't have any laptops or phones that they could connect to the internet. The other problem that we had with communication is that Saints have got a fabulous accent, but it's unlike any accent that I've ever heard before. So I was having to take instructions from people who were on a really bad line and who had a really, really strong accent, which I had never heard before in my life. So it was tricky.
And what led you to visit St Helena for the first time?
This surgeon, who's called Sergio, had been charged with these 5 counts of unlawful wounding, and then in May of 2023 he pleaded guilty. So that created a lot more interest on the island and we got more people approaching us. And then it was announced that he was going to be sentenced on the island in September. So that was when I had a little chat with Steve about whether it would be sensible for me to go out there, to be there for the sentencing and potentially talk to more potential clients.
And that was the first time really I got involved in the case. And so I remember me and Ruth having a chat about the logistics of getting to St Helena, which is not simple. There was a lot of things you don't normally have to think about in a legal case.
And it was a massive journey because it's just so remote. There's only 1 flight a week that goes from Johannesburg.
Did you engage with defendants on that first trip?
Well, I tried to engage with them before I went because it was obvious to me by then there were an awful lot of people who'd been affected and that the best way to deal with this might be to set up some sort of protocol or compensation scheme. And I had written to the governor and I'd written to the Attorney General multiple times before I went, but had got no engagement. It wasn't until I got there that they said, oh, seeing as you're here, have a meeting with the Attorney General. So I had a meeting with him just the day before, or 2 days before Sergio was sentenced.
What happened when you came back to the UK?
Well, we set about negotiating this protocol with the firm that they'd instructed in Liverpool, Waitmans. We were nearly at the point where we had agreed all the terms. And then all of a sudden in March, a representative of the Attorney General attended one of the meetings and essentially ripped up the agreement that we had been negotiating and said, this is the agreement that's on the table, take it or leave it. And so I left it.
It really looked very close. It looked like it was going to be resolved amicably, which is always the best way. It would have been quicker for the claimants, it would have been cheaper for the St Helena government, but unfortunately it was just a complete U-turn at a very late stage, which was very frustrating and has led us to get much more deeply into litigation than would be good for anyone.
So with the protocol off the table, the only option that we had was to sign up all our clients, and by then we had about 140, to individual conditional fee agreements with a view to investigating all of them individually and potentially litigating them individually, which was going to be hugely more expensive and much more time consuming. Then suddenly in July of last year, so that's 2025, just before they were dissolving Parliament for their elections, they rushed through legislation which in essence outlawed Hugh James and outlawed the CFAs that we'd entered into and made it impossible for us to continue acting for any of our clients. We were stopped in our tracks.
Okay, with this sudden change of direction, how did that affect the client?
They were incredibly frustrated because, as far as they were concerned, this surgeon had been convicted of criminal offences. The government had announced a protocol. They thought they were going to get damages. And then suddenly we're saying to them, we can't do anything more. And there is a feeling there, partly because so many of them are employed by the government, that they have to be really careful. So they were very uncertain, and again, they were very vulnerable. So we applied for permission to judicially review. We got permission to judicially review most of the legislation, not all of it. And so we were very keen to communicate that success to the islanders because it's the first time it had been done on St Helena. But then there was another big twist. Because the judge ordered all the parties to get together for what's called a case management conference. But on the eve of that hearing, we got an email from the government showing us a press release that they'd just put out that they were planning to amend all the legislation that we were complaining about, and their amendments were going to address all the concerns that we had.
This is a hugely important issue for the people in St Helena because the government are such a huge part of the community, and the fact that they've done something that was clearly, in the eyes of the people who've been affected, the wrong thing, and they've been forced to change it, is a real turning point, I think, in this litigation, but also for the way the people of St Helena may look towards the government. And I think it's really important to empower the people of St Helena to know this has happened.
So where does this leave you and the clients at the moment?
We've got a very big decision to make about what we do next and what our prospects of success might be. But all those decisions will be made after discussing it with ARAG.
We're totally committed as a firm and with support and partnering with ARAG to take this as far as we possibly can. And we want to see justice for the citizens of St Helena, and we will do everything we can to make sure that happens.